I've just come back from Scotland, and as much as I would have dearly loved to be able to address you tonight and saying that I'd just come back from a newly independent Scotland, sadly it wasn't to be, not this time round. The dream was deferred. We lost the battle, but we certainly didn't lose the war. As the great radical Scots poet Robert Burns said, "For all that and all that, it's coming yet, for all that." And I was walking down to George Square in the centre of Glasgow the other night, not originally as anticipated to join in the victory celebrations there. But as I was walking down to George Square, and anyone that knows the centre of Glasgow will know where I'm talking about, I had to pass through what was called up until 1986 St George's Place. And in 1986, Glasgow City Corporation renamed St George's Place Nelson Mandela Place. Now, this was no simple tribute to Nelson Mandela, although he richly deserved a tribute, because at the time, the offices of the South African consulate were housed in St George's Place. And by renaming it Nelson Mandela Place, every piece of correspondence that went to the filthy, racist apartheid regime bore the name of Nelson Mandela, and how that must have galled the racists. So I was walking down to George Square with my head full of Nelson Mandela and Scottish independence. And I don't want to draw any trite comparisons between the two situations because, of course, they were worlds apart. But nevertheless, there were two important lessons that we in Sussex can draw in relation to the fight to defend the NHS. The first lesson is, why was 90% voting registration achieved in the Scottish referendum? And how did they get an 85% turnout? Well, the answer is simple. It's because they captured the hearts and minds of hundreds of thousands of Scots, and especially 16 and 17-year-olds who were drawn into political activity for the very first time. And the sheer invigoration and the energy that electrified and engaged people with a process brought about when people are presented with a vision, a genuine vision of how things can be, an alternative to unemployment, privatisation and austerity. And the second great lesson we can draw is a speech made by Nelson Mandela very soon after he gained the presidency of South Africa. And in quite a surreal moment, I can't remember the name of the speech or where it was. I've tried to look it up, but I couldn't. But in quite a surreal moment, halfway through the speech, he threw away his script and he said, "Forget this. Don't rely on me. Don't rely on the ANC. Because if you want to effect the sort of change that we need in South Africa, you're going to have to do it yourselves." And my message is the same as Nelson Mandela's. No matter how well-intentioned, no matter how principled, and by the way, I acknowledge that I'm on this platform tonight with one of the most principled MPs who's ever entered the Houses of Parliament, especially in my lifetime. I last heard Caroline Lucas speak at the public sector rally in the Level on July the 10th, and not for her the Ed Miliband, Ed Ball's mantra of strikes are a sign of failure, or we'll continue Tory spending cuts beyond 2015. No, Caroline Lucas stood up and unequivocally supported public sector workers who were out on strike to defend their jobs, to defend their terms and conditions, and to defend the public services that we all rely on. And I've been privileged to be a constituent of Caroline Lucas for the last 4.5 years, and I know against whose name my cross will be going in the ballot box next May. But no matter how principled an MP in the House of Commons, and no matter how invaluable that is, and it is invaluable, it's not enough. And even if Carl got elected over in West Sussex, can you imagine Carl unseating the truly odious Tim Loughton? What a result that would be. But no matter how well-intentioned, we can't rely solely on our elected representatives. Rather, we need to massively escalate the grassroots activism that's been so successful in Brighton and Hove, as evidenced here tonight, and we've got to marry this with rank-and-file trade union action. And that's why it's so gratifying to see this hall so full of activists and trade unionists. As far as halls have been on all previous occasions when Defend the NHS have held public meetings. And I should also mention the victorious Hove Park campaign to defend free education. Another exemplary instance of workers and community activists and people who work in the school joining together to make common cause. And I'll just finish by saying, if there's anybody here from the Health and Wellbeing Board or the Policy and Resources Committee or the CCG, then read my lips. We do not want our substance misuse services in Brighton and Hove privatised. We want them to stay in the National Health Service. And if they do go ahead and privatise the substance misuse service, then I encourage each and every one of us to make the people who made that decision answer for that decision, whether they're elected representatives or they're appointed lackeys. So I started with a dream deferred, and I'll finish with somebody else who had a dream 70 years ago, and his quote is on my union banner branch at the front. And Nye Bevan said, "There'll be an NHS as long as there's people prepared to fight for it." And I know that every single person in this room is prepared to fight for the NHS and their friends and their families. So please, sign the pledge, but even more importantly, please come along and support NHS staff who are coming out on strike on October the 13th. Join our pickets, show support, and let's keep Bevan's dream very much alive. Thank you.